Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrea, I'm your bookworm, and today we have another book review because that's what we have almost 100% of the time, probably 90% of the times. And today we are reviewing not a fantasy book, but a science fiction one, and it's Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. For the ones that don't know, this is part of a planned trilogy that ended up being a duology because Octavia E. Butler died while she was writing the third book, so she was never able to finish it. But the first two books are out and they have been acclaimed by many as great works of art. These books are a dystopian science fiction subgenre, and this one specifically was published in 1993, so it has over 31 years of publishing. And at the time when it was published, it was also nominated for the Locust and the Nebula Awards, which I don't know how it didn't win, but that will come later. But yeah, it was nominated for those two big awards, which were really big back then. For the ones that don't know anything about this book, I will say there are some content warnings about it. There are some very heavy topics described in this book. Not really, I mean, there are parts that are a bit descriptive, but still the themes are quite heavy. So if you are a bit sensitive in those terms, then maybe check out what the sensitive content can be and decide if you want to read it or not. But yeah, but on Goodreads, a lot of people have read and reviewed this book because it has over 188,000 ratings. So almost 200,000 ratings, which is really big for, especially for a science fiction book. And the score it has is also super impressive. It's a 4.21 out of 5, which again, science fiction tends to have lower scores. So having a book that has such a high score, it's a really good thing so far, and it bodes well for our review. So before we jump into the actual review, we have our housekeeping item, which is the synopsis. I'm going to read it to you. If you don't want to hear anything about it, then just skip to the timestamp. It should be floating around. And then if you don't want to listen to anything, any type of spoilers, just jump into that. Otherwise, stick around and you'll be hearing me narrate it. We are coming apart. We're a rope breaking, a single strand at a time. America is a place of chaos where violence rules and only the rich and powerful are safe. Lauren Olamina, a young woman with the extraordinary power to feel the pain of others as her own, records everything she sees of this broken world in her journal. Then, one terrible night, everything alters beyond recognition, and Lauren must make her voice heard for the sake of those she loves. Soon, her vision becomes reality, and her dreams of a better way to live gain the power to change humanity forever. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. Alrighty, with the synopsis out of the way, it's a short one, short and sweet. Let's move on to the review because we don't have any scores to review from previous books. And let's start with our plot category. First thing I want to say is that the plot is quite linear. Now, what do I mean by this? I don't mean that the plot is predictable or boring, because it is neither of those. What I mean is you can kind of guess where the story is headed, but you can't predict exactly what's going to happen every step of the way. I'll try not to be too spoilery. If you don't want to really have even hints of it, just skip a couple of minutes. But I feel like this book had two stages, let's say. The pre and the post fire. And I'll just stick to that so that I don't say any more spoilers. And the thing is, when I was reading the pre-fire stage, I knew that at some point we would have to move to a post something stage. I didn't know what was going to cause it. I didn't know what the catalyst of it would be or how our character would move from one to the other, but I knew that at some point it would happen. I didn't know what would happen after that, but yeah, so I knew there was going to be a change, and that change happened. I was not expecting it the way it happened and all the repercussions that came from it, but still, that's why I say that it's a bit linear but not predictable. So I think despite the linearity that I say, I think it's a great plot. And so for this category, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. Now on to the character category. In this book, we only follow one POV, and that's Olamina's perspective, and she's our main character, and she basically writes in her journal, and that's what we get to see of the world. But I also think that was a very smart strategy from Octavia Butler, because by us only having access to one perspective in this world, we don't get to see what other people are thinking, what are their motives, their suspicions, their fears, whatsoever. And because this is such a I want to say dire world, but it's quite not mysterious but dangerous, and so not knowing what other people are thinking creates suspicion in us as readers. And at the same time, because this is such a harsh and such a violent world, not having POVs of people that can cause that violence also helps us not to have such gratuitous violence or just be violence for the sake of violence. What we see is, okay, that we do see some violence, but it just feels raw and cruel, but it's part of the world. It's not just because we're just, okay, let's just put this here because the world is like this. No, everything has a motive and it carries a message. I think it's also quite impressive that in one book, we see such a development of our main character, Olamina. You see her going from just a young adolescent and making decisions that might mean life or death for her, and see her grow with those decisions. And so you kind of become attached to her because not only you see her grow, but you see the struggle that it is to grow in this world. I think Octavia E. Butler did a great job at balancing this positive side of Olamina, of her development and becoming who she wants to be, with the fear and everything, the negative part of the world that balances it all out. And because of that, I'm gonna give this category a 5 out of 5. Now on to world building, and the funny part of this is that this world is very, very similar to ours, despite it being a dystopian science fiction novel. It's weird how close to reality it is. And it happens between 2023 and 2027, if I'm not mistaken. So as I'm reading it, we were going through the dates that I am currently in. But the craziest part is that this book was written 31 years ago. And for me, it's crazy how Octavia Butler had the perspective and could see so far ahead and write a book that is supposed to be dystopian, but it's actually representing things that could totally happen in our days, especially in America. And not only the things that exist already, but the things that don't exist in our world, but exist in this book, they are so plausible of becoming a reality in our world as well, that I think Octavia Butler had an amazing foresight, and it's impressive. It's just, I'm speechless about it. Yeah, my recommendation about this is, if you want to see where our world can be headed, just read this book and you'll have a pretty good idea about it. So for this category, it's a 5 out of 5. Moving on to writing style. I think this is the first Octavia Butler book that I read, and I enjoyed her writing style. I think it's quite personal in the sense that you feel like it's someone dear to you that is writing this, and it feels very personal in the sense, very intimate and private. And I think her prose goes very smoothly. It has just enough detail for me that I could picture everything that was happening very well. And the few things that were maybe missing, I could fill in with my imagination. And this is also another epistolary novel, because the book is pretty much written as Olamina writing entries in her journal. So I enjoy that, because a few months ago I read another epistolary novel and I was wondering how many others exist and which ones are good to read. So like This Is How You Lose the Time War is one of them that was also really good. So I was curious to read more, and I happened to just bump into this one, and it was quite good as well. The pacing, I think, was also done very well. There was a good balance between the calm and the storm, and whenever the storm would hit, it would hit hard and out of nowhere, and it would be surprising, shocking, but it wouldn't break suspension of disbelief. And like I mentioned before, I think the relatedness you feel with the world and with the characters also shows how well Octavia Butler writes these parts of the novel, and how personal you feel and attached you feel to all of this. So for this category, I'm also going to give a 5 out of 5. And last but not least, we have enjoyment. It is very weird to say that I really enjoyed this book, but yeah, I did. This was one of the reads where I knew it was going to be heavy and it was going to have very heavy themes, but I also knew it was going to be eye-opening. I had great expectations and they were all met. And so when I was reading it, it was like I was in the eyes of the protagonist and the whole world around me would disappear and I would be completely immersed in this story. And it was one of those stories where I was trying to find reasons to keep reading instead of reaching the end of a chapter and being like, okay, I'm gonna pause and do something else. No, I'm gonna continue reading just one more chapter or one more page, just a tiny bit more. So I think it's pretty obvious that I'm gonna give this category as a 5 out of 5. But so that ends our categories, and so just as a refresher, we have 4 for plot, 5 for characters, world building, writing style, and enjoyment. And that gives us a total of 4.8 out of 5. So it's almost a 5. And I mean, Goodreads, this is a 5 for me because you can't give 4 point something. So I definitely gave a 5 out of 5. And I think it deserves it because it's an amazing book. It's so relevant nowadays. The writing is beautiful. The characters are super immersive. So totally recommend. This is definitely one of the books I'll be recommending to a lot of people this year and to the year to come. And yeah, I think it's one of a kind type of book, and I cannot wait to read Parable of the Talents, which is the second book. However, I'm gonna give it a bit of a break because it's heavy and you definitely need to be in a good headspace to read it. Otherwise, you'll be quite depressed to see how close to reality this book is and what it can turn into. I want to know about you. Have you read this book? What do you think? Are you curious to read it? I definitely recommend it. Even if you're a bit hesitant, go and read it. But let me know your opinion about it. Comment down below. And if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and I'll be seeing you on Thursdays and Sundays, okay? See you soon.